Now, I'm really excited to introduce the tin panel. Now, I'm not going to say too much because we have Christian Elfering moderating it. He's the mining catalyst on Twitter and a valued colleague here at Soar Financial. You probably met him organizing one-on-one meetings. So, Christian, I'll let you do the introductions, and thanks for moderating.
Fortunately, the room is not packed, so most people are going to miss out on the best presentation of the conference. Because these two young, bright minds are going to tell you all about the tin market. On the left is Adrian Godas. He runs a Spanish newsletter, 23-year-olds young. And then we have Piet Vanrusselt, sorry, not your online name. And I think Piet is going to start with the demand side, right?
I'll quickly start with, or
just take
some time. Some notes. I have not the same memory as Adrian. He has an elephant memory. I need my notes to check a few times. So tin is very, very small market. I'll start with some history, some fun facts, but maybe when people are joining, come in. I have one question first. Who has been married for more than 10 years? In this audience, probably a few. I see only 3 hands. So the 10th anniversary of a wedding is a tin anniversary, which is because it's a durable element. You can bend it, but it doesn't break. And that's the reference to that anniversary. So that's, let's say, one of the fun facts I will have for you today. Actually, let's say the history starts in 3300 before Christ, when they actually invented for the first time bronze, which is a copper alloy with tin. And that's actually the first time that humans used metals in a way beyond that they did before. So the whole Bronze Age, which was from 3000 before Christ till 1000 before Christ, is based on bronze, on copper, and on tin. So that's another fun fact for this time. I will leave the supply side to Adrian mainly, but know that in Cornwall, so the UK assets where they find a lot of tin in the past, was already producing tin in 2000 before Christ, and they stopped in 1989. So just 20 plus years ago, because the tin price at that moment was $5,000, which is now, I would not say times 10 at 50, but at least times 6 or 7. So they're restarting that also. That's maybe a company also to have a look at, but I'll mention first tin and tin one here. So that's way back. Let's move to the 1900s. So in 1960, there was still at 5K for 1 ton of tin. And we were at 5K for a long time. After the war, we had, let's say, the reconstructions. We have done the move up also in the tin price towards 20K. So that was the first peak in the history of the tin price. Often they show also in the presentation of, let's say, from Chris was the last 2 years. But if you go back, there were like 3 peaks and valleys in that price. So what happened in 1956? There was the first tin, let's say, council together. So the big producers were sitting together, and they say, okay, let's control a bit the market. Let's have some buffer stock, and let's have some export quotas. So what happened then is the price increased till that 20K level. But then some people got greedy, of course. That's one point. The other one is there was increasingly supply outside of that council. So it was big producers, but outside that grew from 10% to 30% of the market was not in that council. So it was pretty hard to keep that control. What happened then in 1980? We are at the peak. We are at 20K level. Some people got greedy. And that's maybe a story that's not told that often, but Malaysia, who was part of that tin council, tried to corner the market through Mark Rich. So Mark Rich, fellow Belgian, sorry for that. Very famous, of course, for the Glencore story, or the let's say the legacy of Mark Rich. So what Malaysia wanted to do is they had their influence in lowering the exports from their own country. But by buying through Mark Rich the price up, the price went to that 25 in 2-3 years. And the LME, for once, did their job, and they saw that happening. And they limited the backwardation, and then the price dropped almost in 1 year a few K back to $15K dollars. What happened then 5 years later in 1985 is that the council went bankrupt. So what happened is that the guy looking after the buffer stock, he expanded each time on the complexity of getting that buffer stock on this level. The price was getting too low, so he had to buy more and more. And at some point, that collapsed that system. So what happened? We had 120K of ton in buffer stock. At that time, the market was only 200 kilotons per year. So if you release 120 kilotons on a market of 200, you see what happens. The price moved in the next 20 years back to that 5K bottom level. Then we go back to, let's say, the 1990s. We're still at 5K. 1990s is the start of the iPhones and the computers. And we see there really the ramp up in electronics use. And electronics, what the two guys before me already told, is a big part of the demand side of tin. Unfortunately, in 2008, we had the financial crisis. Prices went back to 5K in a few months. 3 years later, back to 33. So we have, let's say, a lot of volatile prices in the past. So what we saw in the last month, where we went from 50K to, let's say, 35-ish today, it's not uncommon in such a small market where you are only playing 350K, maybe 380K tons a year. So 10, 20K difference makes a rather explosive difference sometimes. Then actually we had, I'm reading too small here. We had a conflict-free tin. That's an agreement actually coming from the US again, only in 2010. So that's really recent. It's not even 15 years ago that mainly then, let's say, the sourcing of the big suppliers, look at Apple, look at Intel, look at Microsoft, they agreed, or they had to agree to have responsible tin sourcing. That's also a big part of the Alphamint story. There was a big artisanal mine already, very high grade, everybody knew it. And then came that regulations, and that was opportunity for that team to come in, take that mine over and work with the community to make that an official mine, conflict-free, and set up their shop at the best asset at the time, and probably still is. What we then also have is the lead-free tin, so the solder. That's only in 2006, again, not even 20 years ago, that the world said, okay, lead is bad for us. It gives kidney problems. It gives development issues with children. A lot more science behind it, and lead was actually a big part of solder. So in pushing there for lead-free tin, the content of tin went up. So now in your solder, it's 89% is tin, and then maybe for the companies here, 3 to 8% is also still silver. So if you want to push that narrative in your meetings, it's also fine. There's still some lead in there, so the threshold is 0.1%. So it's not completely out, but it's mostly is out. Just to go back, maybe we saw the slide from, I think it was this morning, from Professor Denning on the oil market. It's a big-ass market called like this. For tin, it's just 10 to 15 billion dollars a year. If you multiply that by, sorry, I have to look again. If you multiply it by 10, you're at the copper market size. You multiply that by 2, it's the gold market. And you multiply again by 10, that's the oil market, the oil market. So it's really is a small market. It's a niche market. Not a lot of people know about it. There are many research analysts following this story. And it's also, I think, apparent on the stage. We are, let's say, semi-professionals. We're not analysts at Stifel or at Canaccord, but it's a very interesting market to follow. I'll maybe jump to the demand side, more or less. So 50% is indeed coming from solder. If you then dive deeper, what is then driving that demand is, okay, renewable energy. If you just look at solar power in 2015, that was using 5 kilotons. Today it's using 20 kilotons, and the expectations in the 5 years, it's 30 kilotons. So that's going in the right direction. You can make up your own mind where that's going, but 30 kilotons it's almost 10% of, let's say, the overall demand. 5G, I just bought a new phone that's 5G that has 30 to 40% more microchips in the phone than the 4G ones. So everybody will, I think, buying a new phone in the next 2-3 years will all be 5G phones. So that's, again, a natural evolution of going there in that direction. A big story is what we touched upon earlier is the electrical vehicles. You have, depending on the source you're listening to, Thomas or Chris or other analysts, it's the content in an EV car is around 800 grams to 1.5 kilograms of tin, while a combustion engine was around 400 grams. So everybody buying an electrical vehicle or just replacing his old one with an electrical vehicle now will double or triple the demand, depending, of course, on which model and etc. What is the problem, or let's say maybe a challenge, is the miniaturization in the chips itself. So what we have to look at is, of course, as it's 50% of the demand. What we've seen in the past, chips are getting smaller. If you're getting smaller and more powerful, you need less chips for the same calculating power. So the International Tin Association made a nice graph where you can clearly see the miniaturization in the last 10 years has dropped significantly. So we really dropped there, but we're really getting to the lowest level. I don't really fully buy that, because they're also biased. If I read from the industry itself, from ASLM, which are making the biggest machines for these chips, they are confident they can push it lower and lower. There's only in the US, $40 billion is yearly invested in the R&D in microchips. So that's a massive amount. And globally, the investment capital that is already committed by the biggest players is $600 billion in capacity expansions. So that means new factories in America, in Europe, and probably also in Asia, in making more and more of these chips. So it's a pretty long-term, it's a pretty easy story on the demand side, depending on what you believe will happen. With that, I'll give it maybe to the supply side, to Adrian, and then we can have more of a discussion.
Yeah.
Fine?
Well done. Okay, let's do it. I don't know why you didn't use the slides to talk about demand.
He learned it by heart.
Okay. Then I'm gonna skip it and just straight to the supply side, because demand story is great, but supply is better, obviously. Because for the supply is in an amazing situation in the tin market, and this is the reason why it's my favorite commodity, tin, because there is basically no new supply incoming. There are a lot of amazing stories. Like, for example, this guy is called Simón Patiño. He was a Bolivian guy, and he became one of the most richest guys in the world, thanks to the tin mines he owned in Bolivia. And let's go to the point. Tin supply is reasonably really concentrated in a few countries, basically China, Indonesia, Myanmar, and some other countries like Peru, Congo, and a few others. This is talking obviously about the concentrate, the tin. The final tin, the refined material, is mostly produced in Asia, or mostly in China, But let's take a look at each mine and country separately. These are some introduction numbers from some different countries. As you can see, no tin production at all in US. That's really remarkable. And this is a beautiful chart from an anonymous guy called Red Speculator. He's an Aussie guy, amazing, good friend of mine. And as you can see, it's a small market, 300,000 tons per year only. China is the biggest producer by far, with 90,000 tons per year. And China, the situation in there, we have flat supply for over 20 years. Especially, they come mainly from Yunnan region. It's in the middle of China. It's a very mature supply in depletion. Also, they managed to open new mines in different areas, like in Inner Mongolia, in the north of the country. And I think the case of Daegu is a big example, paradigmatic example of the industry, because it's a really big mine, world-class asset, facing declining grades, as well as other big Chinese mines like Wenxiang. And the Yunnan Deputy General Manager, Yunnan is the biggest tin producer in the world. They are Chinese. And they literally say it's difficult to encourage ore production to us because there are no more tin available in China. So basically they will have flat production for at least this decade. Indonesia, it's a really interesting case because right now almost all production is controlled by PT Timah. It's a state-owned company that de facto controls all the smelting capacity, creating a big bottleneck in the country. And onshore reserves are mostly exhausted, so they have to go offshore. And the first time when I read offshore tin production, what the hell is that? And look at the pictures. Basically, some fishermen, they took the boats and with some garden material, they go to the floor sea to get the cassiterite, the mineral where tin is contained. It's amazing. You can see documentals in internet, but the pictures are amazing. It's an absolutely destructive method of mining, as you can imagine. The vast majority of production just come from the sea, from these artisanal miners that they must to sell all the tin to PT Timah. It's very flexible supply, very variable due to the monsoons in this area of the world, but rising cost plus exhausted resources onshore are making this is one of the main reasons why I think the new tin price floor will be over $30,000 per ton. Myanmar or Burma. It's a really weird case because Myanmar didn't produce tin at all until a few years, until I think it's 20. Was in 20. Basically until 2011, they didn't produce tin at all. But suddenly they discovered a few large deposits, and now it's the third biggest global producer. But as quickly he came, quickly he disappeared. And grades are falling, open pit resources are exhausted, they are moving to underground, and technically only 3 years of reserves left. But they continue to find more and more all the time. But production is expected to slide, already did, from 50 to 30,000 per ton. And a civil war in the country don't make it easy to keep mining. And apart of that, most of the mines are in the jungle, in the middle of the jungle, inside of the country. Africa, mostly artisanal operations in Burundi, Congo, Nigeria, and Rwanda. The most and the best mine in the continent is BC, owned by Alpha Moon. 12,000 tons production, plus in Mapa South, they're going to start to produce in this other deposit next year, another extra 7,000 tons. Manono, owned by an Australian company, they plan to mine 3,000 tons, but they are now in litigation against Caijing for some contracts reasons, and they wanted to produce tin as byproduct from this lithium mine. Rutondo, it's a private owned by MedTech, private company. The initial plan were 2,000, but it's producing less. WIS, owned by Afritin, producing only 500 tons per annum. They want to rise output to 5,000, but I think it's quite difficult for them due to water availability. Mokopane, only 700, another Afritin project, still in development phase. In South America, all the production comes from Bolivia, Brazil, and Peru. Bolivia is controlled through the state and some small-scale mines. In Brazil, some mines like Pitinga, 7,000, owned by Minsur. And Minsur is another key player in the global tin industry, as is the owner of San Rafael. San Rafael is another total freak of the nature tin deposit, but is exhausted, and now they are mining the tailings. And they call it B2 tailings, plus the Nazareth expansion. So basically, Bolivia production is flat, Brazil production is flat, and Peru just rebound to 30,000 per year. But I think that's the peak they can achieve. In Australia, it's really interesting because there were a lot of production in the past. There are many prospects, many projects, but only one mine that is Renison, owned by MetalX. The other ones, Arderland, Cleveland, Granville, Hemskirk. Honestly, I think most of them are crap. Honestly, because I think they have bad metallurgy. Many have too much sulfides to be real economically. So the only real mine is Renison, and maybe in the future Rintails, owned by MetalX too. And I hope that in the future and more tin mines will come online, like Taronga, in first-tin hands. In Europe, we have Sinopec. It's a lithium mine, noting that really it's a really low-grade thing. It's just a byproduct, so I think only a couple of hundreds of tons per year once in production. La Parrilla in Spain. Actually, in Spain we have many tin mines, like La Parrilla, Oropesa, Lagoa Salgada. Well, Lagoa is in Portugal. And for example, the Oropesa project, owned by Elementos, another mine that I think they have a pretty bad metallurgy with a lot of stannite, the sulfide tin metal. But in UK, in Cornwall, there are really beautiful mines and beautiful projects, like the South Crofty, owned by Cornish, and we hope that it's gonna be online in a few years. And we have the Tellerhäuser here in Germany in a few years, another first-tin project with extra 3,000 tons per year. And then we have other assets all around the world. Sirambet, one of the few big projects around, more than 6.5 thousand tons per year in Kazakhstan, but it's another really complicated mine, really complex ore. They want to produce many byproducts and has been around for more than a decade with new feasibility, new pre-feasibility, and never is built. Russia produced something. The company is Silikdar. They want to add, and they produce 2.5 thousand tons, and they want to produce another extra 2,000. And then some artisanal mining in Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, and other small projects with tin as byproduct, mainly from tungsten projects. Most of the tungsten projects has some credits in tin, like the Rafaela in Spain, Tungsten West in England. So the current mine production, according to the International Tin Association, is expected to fall to 250 by only 8 years. And while removing a couple of good projects, nobody has invested in tin. Apart of Alphamin and Minsur, nothing left. Only B2 tailings in Peru and Emapa in the Congo. And one of the reasons is that the market is so small that no major can invest here, because it's a 10 billion market per year. So BHP could buy the whole sector many times with just a quarter profit. And then this is a beautiful slide. What is my favorite in the presentation? Basically, looking at the whole projects and doing a serious evaluation. And I don't believe many of them will be online, to be honest. Many of them are small. We have, for example, the Santa Comba project in Spain. No way that mine could be built. We have Kasbah in Morocco. We have Taronga in Australia. Let's see if they can build Sirambet in Kazakhstan, Tellerhauser here in Germany, South Crafty. And if you put together all the numbers, I think the real supply before 5 years is only another extra 34,000 per year extra. That's nothing, because the market structure is moving. I think we will have higher prices for longer, and 35 is the new floor in tin prices. Not only just for the marginal cost curve, but only because you have an expanding market. The demand is growing, so you need more and more supply. So you need the $35,000 per ton to make economic, to open and look for new mines. The stocks are at historical, really low levels. I think this is only in LME, but plus Shanghai stocks. I think globally there are only stocks for 3 days demand or something like that. 3-4 days.
It has gone up a bit, so it's, I think, around
It's
5K together.
Yeah.
And daily usage, it's 1K, so it's 5 days, more or less.
So only 5 days demand. Secondary supply, coming mostly from scrap, is likely to rise output in Asia, and it's the marginal producer that will take advantage of the high prices. There is not many information available around, so let's just believe the International Tin Association projected. So in balance, we have now these numbers in demand, and if we put a bit of growth to 410,000 per ton in a few years, we have to put, as I said, 34 new supply, less around 10 in Myanmar, less another 10 depletion across the other countries, and extra 15,000 from secondary supply. So if you do the numbers, we will clearly have a tight market for a few years at least. And this is assuming that Sirambet is built, because there are only 2 big mines ready to build. Mapa South in Congo and Sirambet. There are only them. So if Mapa South will be built for sure, but let's see if Sirambet can do it. And that's a screenshot from the International Tin Association presentation that major suppliers likely to struggle to maintain output, no new supply reality, deficits due to historic underinvestment. No, apart of a few companies, there has been no real greenfield exploration. So that's all. I just put another extra slide talking about metallurgy, but that's secondary. So that's all, I think.
Great job, guys. Does anybody have any questions? Come on. Give them questions.
It's new for us.
Guy.
I find the recycling aspect interesting. I haven't really looked at it at all. So, like, how does the recycling aspect of it all work, and how scalable is it?
That's something I tried to learn about. But it's complicated because I don't know why there is no information at all. As tin market is small, trying to find about recycling tin is even a smaller market, so no real information. Honestly.
Go to flea markets and find all the tins
Yeah.
and plates and cups and stuff.
Yeah, I could do that. Yeah, that's the only idea to supply the deficit.
Kai, the big issue there is that, or issue, it's good for tin. It's always used in very small quantities. So in your iPhone, it's now around 5 or 6 cents dollar in there. And I have a study from 2006, so it's pretty old. On the recovery, they can recover half of it. So you will see that recovery will, or secondary supply, like ETA is saying, it will grow. But it's so diverse, it's hard. For electronics, it's easier. But like in the chemicals, where they mix it, it's impossible. And the cost efficiency is minus 1,000%. So they are also, ATA again is saying, okay, we are looking at research and replacing tin if it's getting double the price. I mentioned to a few companies here, if silver would go double in a year, you would see 50 IPOs, and we saw only 2. So there's no project out there. Yeah. But to come back to the secondary supply, yes, it will increase for sure, but it's still not a significant market. Well, you first need to dig it before you can use it as a secondary supply, of course. But there has been some research on replacing it in the solder for the electronics, and that is not giving any advanced research, or not any advanced solutions in that research. So bear in mind.
Further down that rabbit hole, what is a substitute for tin?
I asked Mark Thompson, who is also, let's say, an industry. He was the biggest tin trader, let's say, in Trafigura in London for a long time. And I asked him that question, and he said probably they go back in some parts of the world. They will probably go back to the lead-based solder, because that's an existing solution, but it's a harmful one. But who's going to control it?
Yeah, they try to use some resins in processors as substitute, but they don't have good conductivity to do the job, and I read that add a lot of complexity to the assembly process. They are trying to substitute in some uses, like for example in PVC stabilizers. Instead of tin, you use zinc calcium stuff, but it has worse performance. So it's really complicated to try to substitute. No question. No.
Do either of you see tin being placed on like a critical metals list in like Canada? And
it's already on the European and the US one.
Not in Canada.
Canada, yeah.
In the European Union list, I think it is. Yeah.
I'm sure on the European side and the US side, but Canada one, no, I'm not sure. They will probably follow the Big Brother, no?
There was a question over there. Who had a question?
Thomas?
Yeah, well, I would like to answer the recycling question a little bit. So it's in small volumes. So once if we recycle more electronic scrap, the figure might increase, because that's a pending issue, a pending problem. If you look at calculation, how much electronic is produced and how much is recycled. So there is a lot of tin in. So there it is recyclable. The rest is, like the gentleman said, it's in very small volumes in everything else. So most of that ends up in slag and is not recoverable, because simply the costs are too high in order to get it back. And well, for replacement, maybe it's worth to look into the other 50% than the solder, because for solder one question is going back to lead, maybe. I don't believe that because most of the producers don't operate several lines to ship material, to produce material. And in most of the industrialized countries, developed countries, the lead-based solder is forbidden, and it will remain. And silver is one of the options for semiconductors, but this is harmful due to they are very sensitive in regards to heat. And the melting point of silver is something like 926, and for tin it's 200. So that is a challenge, let's say it like that. And it's a non-developed kind of technology. But for the rest, there are about 20% of the market is chemicals. So stabilizers for plastics may be possible. Short term, most probably not, so it takes time. So it's a stabilizer for plastics that most probably we want to remain it transparent, the plastics. But that's an option. One other is
the third pillar is then the tin plates, which is now still, I think, 10-12% demand side, but it's going down 1 or 2% every year because it's being replaced by aluminium cans and then plastic cans. So annually we make 90 billion cans, Coca-Cola, iced tea, Sprite, whatever. But also, of course, to conserve food. But that market has already almost not collapsed, but transformed completely to aluminium and plastic. So the market's already down to only 10% of tin, and that's the easily recoverable. So also in that pillar, it will be lower because it's just less used.
Another question: would you expect that the big miners will return back into the tin market because they? After the 1985, they disappeared completely. So would you expect that it gets interesting for them? You made a short comment. With the quarterly result, they could easily buy the whole market.
Yeah, honestly, I think they won't, just because it's too small for them. I think so. Alphamin is one of the biggest producers, and it's worth 1 billion. So a major with 40 billion valuation, it's just too small for them. Just to do the due diligence and all the work, I don't think so, in my opinion.
The biggest selling point for, let's say, Alphamin then as a almost 10% producer or 5% at the moment is security of supply. It's not the size or the profit, like it doesn't affect their balance sheets, but it has the certainty of the supply. For, let's say, if it's a Chinese entity buying it, then they already have 5% of the supply, and that's worth more to them than just the cash flow. Next one.
Would you, assuming that in particular the use of solder is important for all those microelectronics, automotive, PV producers, you name it, would you expect that there is a further trend to go further upstream in order to secure raw material streams? So I know that Tesla engineers are working around all over the world in order, one point is to secure, but another one as well maybe to acquire raw material resources.
Yeah.
Would that be a potential case for tin as well?
Yeah, I'm sure. It has been for a long time, people talking about that. And yeah, I think more and more companies will go directly to the source. And I think most of the automobile companies will own mines, especially on lithium and nickel.
What's been the story in the last 2 years is, I think in 2020, Elon Musk said, if you can responsibly mine nickel, call me. And then on Twitter, he has let's say his strategical supplier for strategic metals is a lady, I forgot her name, but she's tweeting and she said, okay, we really like Talon metals and nickel. And then 1 year later, they made a deal, an offtake agreement with Talon on their nickel deposit in America. So they're not buying it yet, but they're having an offtake agreement, which is pretty standard. But they're also supporting in R&D. So they're spending a lot of money and resources on helping Talon to get there the best, let's say, recoveries, but also in the CO2 that they are putting back in the ground. And that's a part of the storage and carbon neutral, let's say, mining way of working. So that's the first time that they actually did that, and that's maybe a good example, but that's in the nickel market. What we are saying in tin, it can happen, but it's so small. Who are they gonna buy? There's like 4 or 5. So maybe you in 4 years.
Where do you guys see the price of tin in like 2-5 years?
Piet.
Well, I don't do
I assume
forecasts.
I assume it's an increase, and how would you play the increase? Like I think all of us are overweight alpha-min.
Obviously.
Give us your best guesstimate.
I'm gonna say at least over $40,000 per ton, the tin price, and alpha-min will be receive a takeover before next year.
Yeah. And then Metal X would be your preferred vehicle.
Because it's the only other one producer.
And what about Explorers?
I think the producers are so cheap that I don't want to overthink about the Explorers.
Fair enough. I think we're out of time. Any last questions? Adam?
Thanks, guys. A great presentation. I find in these tight markets, you really can't underestimate the entrepreneurial and ingenuity of the artisanal miners, especially in Southeast Asia. Can you just remind us of the market share of TIMA and their ability to scale, let's say, tack on an additional processing circuit on their plant, and would that have a drastic impact in the near term, or is that more long term?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing is, you are right. I think they're trying to predict the artisanal miners' production is barely impossible, because the artisanal is not they don't work with using a big plants. So, but I think that Indonesia can do it. Onshore resources are depleted, and there start to many Indonesian companies and individuals are starting to complain because they are destroying other sectors in Indonesia, like tourism, because it's environmentally a totally disaster. So I don't think they can. Maybe in other regions like Southeast Asia, like in Thailand or Vietnam, yeah. But Indonesia, the key alluvial artisanal country, I think they can do it.
And in the Congo, you have at the moment 25,000 artisanal miners. So can you add to that? Probably yes, but it's not going to be massive amounts of extra kilotons coming to the market. Who knows? But it's a good question, and it's hard to put your finger on, because in this small market, if you add 10K tons somewhere out of the blue, what will do? But
that's true.
Yeah. If it pays the bills, they will do it. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Piet and Adrian. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks.